They never asked my name. They only asked if I could make it clean, quiet, undetectable. I said yes, and they gave me a room with no windows, no clocks, no air. We called it Kamera. It had a drain in the center and a clipboard by the door. That was all it needed. I wasn't a killer, not in the way you think. I was a craftsman. I designed deaths that whispered. I studied the body's defenses like a thief studies locks, and then I picked them. My tools weren't guns or knives. They were glass vials, powders finer than dust, drops that looked like tears. They came to me when mess wasn't an option, when the truth had to dissolve with the corpse. That was my art. Make death look like sleep, or love, or laughter. I didn't need applause, just silence. Silence meant it worked. The first time I entered Kamera, I noticed it had no echo. The walls were so thick, so padded with secrecy, that even my footsteps sounded ashamed. It wasn't a lab. It wasn't a prison. It was a void, a concrete cavity built beneath Moscow's skin, where truth was buried before it could be born. There were no plaques, no signs, just a steel door with a 3-digit code and a silence that smelled like bleach and iron. That's where they put me, not because I believed in the party and I didn't. Not because I was brilliant, many were. They chose me because I didn't flinch. I could take a pulse with one hand and administer poison with the other without blinking. They called it Kamera like a joke. The word meant chamber. Simple, cold, neutral. But it wasn't neutral. Nothing in that room was. It was where the state's enemies were turned into test subjects, and I was told to make their deaths meaningful, controlled, reproducible, invisible. My first test was with mustard gas, the classic horror from old wars. But this wasn't a battlefield. There was no wind, no panic, just one man in a chair and a dose calculated to linger. I remember his confusion. His breathing grew slower, then faster. He scratched at his eyes, but they weren't burning, not yet. The symptoms bloomed with a strange grace, blisters forming beneath the skin like trapped screams. He thought it was a routine checkup, a lung scan. I even smiled at him before stepping behind the glass. That's the part that stayed with me. How much trust they had. They entered the chamber like it was a clinic. They left like vapor. The guards didn't ask questions. They never did. They logged the time of entry, the batch number, and helped me mop the floor when it was over. One of them smoked afterward. Right there, over the body. That was when I realized Kamera wasn't a secret project. It was a culture, a shrine to detachment. I kept notes, of course, the man's weight, age, reaction time, the delay between exposure and collapse. But I also noted how his pupils dilated, how long he mumbled nonsense before the paralysis. Those details mattered. They helped me fine-tune the dosage, enough to kill, but never fast, never obvious. That was the mandate, no drama. We didn't want martyrs, we wanted ghosts, deaths that couldn't be traced, couldn't be mourned, couldn't be proven. That's what they paid me for. Sometimes I'd replay the security footage in the dark, studying his face frame by frame. There's a moment, just before his breathing turns shallow, where he blinks 3 times in a row. I've watched that blink more times than I can count, not out of guilt, out of precision. That blink told me exactly when the fear became irreversible, when the body knew, even if the brain didn't. I labeled that footage Subject 01A. No name, no rank, just a reference point in a growing library of erasures. The next morning they brought in another, same door, same clipboard, same look of trust. And I remember thinking, this one will take longer. There's a purity to poison that no bullet can match. A gun makes a mess, a knife leaves a story. But poison, real poison, is quiet. It doesn't scream. It doesn't stain. It simply rearranges the silence. My goal was never chaos. I wasn't interested in vomiting or convulsions or bodies writhing like worms. I wanted precision. I wanted stillness. I wanted the body to remain exactly as it was, only no longer occupied. They gave me samples, ricin, cyanide, arsenic, classic tools of desperation. Blunt instruments, really, crude. They worked, yes, but always left something behind. Foam in the mouth, rigid fingers, eyes that told on us. I didn't want fear, I wanted absence. So I began searching for it, the perfect agent. No taste, no scent, no trace. A death that looked like a nap. I tested compounds on sugar cubes, dissolved them into tea, injected them into fruit. I studied the pH of bile and the speed of enzyme breakdown. I learned how the tongue lies, how it hides things, how even pain can be muted when the dosage is right. My assistants called it madness. I called it craft. One compound, a derivative of botulinum, stopped the diaphragm with a whisper. The subject blinked, once, then again, then never again. He looked like he'd fallen asleep during a conversation. That was a near success. I marked the vial with a red dot, promising. Another compound caused microseizures deep in the cerebellum. From the outside, the man simply twitched, like a fly landing and taking off again. Inside, his brain was folding in on itself. Beautiful. But the twitch, it ruined the illusion. It was a noise, a ripple, still not good enough. I tried integrating the poison into chocolate, a luxury, a gift, the kind you send to someone important before they vanish. But the cocoa fat altered the absorption rate, too slow. They vomited. I didn't want vomiting. Vomiting was betrayal. One batch worked perfectly on rats but turned human eyes yellow. Another shut down the kidneys silently but left a smell in the breath, faint, metallic. It wouldn't do. The moment someone cringes at the taste or curls their lip, the mystery is gone. Suspicion grows, stories begin, and I didn't want stories. The body must look natural, the soul erased. That was my mantra. I adjusted variables obsessively, pH levels, molecular weight, solubility. I created entire charts of timing. How long from ingestion to collapse? How long the pulse would persist? How long the muscles would pretend to live? I discovered that death isn't a switch, it's a negotiation. One I learned to win quietly. One man smiled after taking the dose. He was pleased with his meal, then he looked confused, then calm. He fell forward like a leaf. No twitch, no breath, no shadow of pain. That one. I saved the utensils. I studied the curve of the spoon. I began to call them echoes, the after-deaths that told me what I needed to know, a tightening of the jaw, a flex of the toe. These were failures. Even beauty, if it lingered, was a flaw. It had to be pure, unseen. Eventually, I stopped seeing them as men. They were instruments, and I was tuning for silence. They never screamed. That's the part people never believe. No one fought. No one ran. They came into the room with their shoes polished and their collars straightened. Some even smiled. They thought it was medicine, a checkup, a study to help the motherland. They called themselves volunteers. We never corrected them. They signed papers filled with blanks, stamped with seals. They nodded through explanations filled with medical words we knew they didn't understand. We offered meals, clean beds, a cigarette after dinner. They thought that meant dignity. It meant dosage. Most were criminals, at least on paper. Some were dissidents. Some just said the wrong thing near the wrong ear. Others knew too much, the kind of knowledge that made people vanish. I gave them a place to vanish with purpose. They were told they were helping science, that their sacrifice would improve treatments, maybe even save soldiers. That lie was easy. People believe anything when you whisper it kindly. I kept charts, blood pressure, metabolism, behavior. But what I really studied was trust. How far it would stretch, how much it would swallow before snapping. One man, Subject 117, arrived with a broken hand and a scar beneath his eye. He offered to clean the lab. He said he wanted to be useful. We gave him soup. He thanked us twice. He died with that thank you still on his lips. Mid-chew, it worked. I was proud. Another, Subject 131, told me about his wife while I inserted the IV. Her name was Lena. He asked if I could deliver a message to her when he was transferred. I told him I would. I wrote it down. I folded it into the file I would later incinerate. They came in with questions. They left as answers. There were meals laced with microdoses, measured to decay slowly. There were pills disguised as vitamins. One batch was mixed into honey. That one took nearly 36 hours. He smiled most of the first day, then the capillaries in his eyes began to rupture. Beautiful patterns, like snowflakes. He thought it was fatigue. He said he needed rest. He slept and never woke. We called that formula Quiet 3. The guards called it mercy. It wasn't. Every time someone asked if the food tasted different, I adjusted the seasoning. Every time a subject hesitated to swallow, I changed the texture. Every resistance was a note. Every note made the next death smoother. They weren't numbers to me, not entirely. They were processes, data. Each death taught me something new. The angle of the head before collapse. The time it took for the breath to stop. The moment they realized something was wrong, that second of hesitation, betrayal blooming behind the eyes. That was the pinnacle. That was the signal. We filmed many of them, cameras hidden in the corners, lenses no larger than a fingernail. We watched them in slow motion. We memorized the cadence of collapse. It became choreography. One subject prayed before every meal. We gave him the same dose 3 times. Nothing happened. On the 4th, we increased it by 3 milligrams. He cried just once. His lips turned blue like ink. Sometimes I wondered if prayer interfered with absorption. It didn't. We checked. There were whispers, of course, among them, rumors, but they never led anywhere. By the time one man began to doubt, his dose was already inside him. Suspicion never outpaced science. That's what made Kamera perfect. No riots, no revolts, just routine. By the end of each week, we'd cleared the registry. The guards scrubbed the floors. The beds were stripped. New names replaced the old, and I would sit at my desk re-watching the footage, not to grieve, to refine. Because every death could be improved, every silence could be made cleaner. They never asked me if I could kill someone. They asked how. The requests came folded in red envelopes, sealed and numbered, with no names, only descriptions. A minister who drinks red wine with lunch, a journalist who uses fountain pens, a general who lights 1 cigarette before bed. I never saw their faces. I didn't need to. I saw their habits, that was enough. A man's ritual tells you everything, what he trusts, what he touches without thinking. So I built weapons for their trust. A drop of alkaloid in a bottle of Bordeaux, just enough to mimic a stroke. A pen cartridge filled with neurotoxin, 1 broken nib away from cardiac failure, a toothpaste infused with a paralytic compound, flavorless, odorless, activated by saliva. He'd brush his teeth and forget to breathe. That one was elegant. I kept the tube. The challenge wasn't the chemistry, it was the disguise. Every agent had to match the rhythm of its target. Some men died with a smile, others needed to suffer. It depended on the message. Some deaths were warnings, others were whispers. The dosage told the story. One assignment demanded a slow burn. A poet, I think, or maybe just a loud mouth. His tea was laced with a compound that dissolved his vocal cords over weeks. No pain, just loss. He tried to speak at a protest and choked on silence. The state was pleased. They called it symbolic. Another case needed speed. A diplomat scheduled for a radio interview. I designed a capsule that triggered a seizure exactly 6 minutes after ingestion. He died live, mic still on. Listeners heard the final gasp. They thought it was a heart attack. It wasn't. I began to collect patterns. Wine drinkers had longer absorption windows. Smokers absorbed faster through the mucous membranes. I studied tongue temperatures, breathing rhythms, how fast someone swallows when they're distracted. I became fluent in death's dialects. Not every formula was successful. One man survived a full dose. He vomited mid-flight, made it to a hospital. We sent flowers. The next dose arrived as eye drops. He never opened the card. Eventually, I stopped thinking in terms of good or evil. I thought in palettes. I was painting absence. Every assignment was a canvas. The body was just a medium. The message was in how it ended. One of my proudest works was a cologne, a soft, citrusy blend. It activated under UV light, absorbed through the pores. The man wore it before going on stage. The heat from the spotlights triggered the compound. He collapsed during applause, still smiling. His wife said he died doing what he loved. She didn't know what loved him back. Each man deserved his own death. That's what I believed, not out of mercy, out of balance. The cause had to match the method. An arrogant mouth deserved to rot. A liar deserved silence. A traitor deserved doubt, the kind that makes your heart skip until it doesn't start again. I wasn't just delivering endings, I was designing them. That was the art of Kamera, not just to kill, but to kill correctly. The poison was only half the experiment. The rest was the face. I stared into their eyes as often as I could. I requested mirrored windows, but sometimes I stood closer. Nothing could replace proximity. You had to see the exact second the betrayal bloomed. That quiet crack between trust and realization. It wasn't the convulsions that interested me. It was the pause before the body failed. That moment when the mind understood it had been fooled by kindness. That was the sacred moment. One man looked at me and asked, "Will this help someone?" I nodded. He smiled. 2 minutes later, his vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, like swatting invisible dust. Then he stopped blinking altogether. Another one, older, slower, tasted the tea, complimented it, then reached for his cane and missed. His hand passed through the air like he'd forgotten how to be alive. That was the face I studied. Not the collapse, not the end, but the in-between, the hesitation before the body surrendered. I kept a notebook filled with faces, drawn from memory, sometimes from film. Each one was different. One clenched his jaw, one laughed. One tried to speak but only hummed. Another wept, not in fear but gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, thinking I'd saved him. That one. I replayed his death more than once. What intrigued me most was how the soul behaved when it sensed the exit door. Not all of them begged, some made peace too quickly. That always disappointed me. I preferred the ones who lingered, whose eyes searched for answers that weren't coming. One man locked eyes with me the whole time. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. His lips trembled once, then he said, "You know this means nothing." He was wrong. It meant everything. You see, poison is just delivery. The real gift is what it unlocks. It peels the mind like an onion, strips off the ideas, the memories, the pride, until only truth remains. And truth is rarely noble. In those last seconds, every man becomes the same animal. And yet, every man reveals something new. That was the paradox. Death equalizes, but it also exposes. I learned more about the human spirit from 20 dying eyes than from 1,000 psychology books. One subject begged for his mother, another recited a poem. One simply whispered, "It's not fair." Fair? He had no idea how precise I had to be, how much math went into mercy. There was one, subject 188, who kept repeating, "I know this is a dream," as if saying it enough would wake him. His pupils shrank to pinpoints. He choked once, then went still. I whispered, "You're awake." Oh, but he didn't hear me. Or maybe he did. The guards rarely looked. They left that part to me. They thought the horror was in the toxin. But I knew better. The horror was in recognition, in the silence between heartbeat and collapse. That silence taught me to listen, not with ears, but with skin. I could feel when someone knew. I could sense when the betrayal reached their spine. I could measure the volume of guilt, the depth of confusion. I wasn't killing them. I was reading them. And in those final seconds, They were honest. Not every death was beautiful. Some sputtered, some screamed. One convulsed so violently he broke his own teeth before dying. That was never the goal. Elegance mattered, clean exits, quiet endings. Anything else was a stain. On the floor, on the project, on me. Failures weren't just miscalculations. They were threats, noise, exposure. I learned quickly that the difference between a perfect dose and a disaster was measured in milligrams, or seconds, or pride. One compound I tested in a courtroom slipped into the handkerchief of a witness. It was supposed to trigger a gradual decline, subtle, spread over days. Instead, he collapsed mid-sentence, foaming at the mouth, gasping like a fish on the tile. The stenographer screamed. That recording never left the building. The body disappeared that night. So did the stenographer. We didn't discuss it. We burned the notes. We altered the formula. The ministry called it a regrettable episode. I called it a reminder. Another failure happened at a military banquet. A general, loud, drunk, arrogant, took a sip of wine and coughed blood onto his medals. The compound had bonded too aggressively with the alcohol. His liver ruptured within minutes. The room froze. No one dared to move. I excused myself and went straight to the restroom. Not to vomit, but to recalculate the pH adjustment. We made it look like a stroke. His family received a letter, a medal, and an edited version of the night. I had to clean up my mistakes. With silence. With other poisons. Some colleagues couldn't keep up. One pharmacist misread a measurement and exposed himself to the fumes. He lasted 6 minutes. He died with his eyes wide open and a syringe still in hand. We logged it as spontaneous reaction, then incinerated his belongings. Another technician asked too many questions. He disappeared between shifts. The guards shrugged. No paperwork, no alarm. That was the protocol. Kamera didn't tolerate uncertainty or memory. There was no trash bin in the lab, no place for waste, only furnaces and forms. Everything had to be accounted for, not for ethics, but for efficiency. Even failure had to disappear completely. I kept certain vials to myself. The ones that worked too fast, too loudly, or too well. Not for use, for reference, for memory. Like keeping rejected paintings in a drawer, reminders of the brushstrokes you'll never make again. I had one dose hidden in my desk, sealed in glass, labeled only with a number, 39A. I never tested it, I never needed to, but I knew what it could do. I called it the end of the file. There was an unspoken understanding among us. If you ever became the liability, you knew what drawer to open. Some used it. Most didn't have time. You learn things from failure that success never teaches you. You learn the sound a man makes when his heart panics. You learn how long foam takes to settle on tile. You learn how fast rumors spread and how much faster fear does. But most of all, you learn how to vanish the error before it spreads. In Kamera, perfection wasn't an aspiration. It was a requirement. The cleaner the work, the longer it stayed alive. The louder the mistake, the quicker you followed it into the ground. I was careful, I stayed quiet, and when I failed, I buried the evidence in flesh, in ash, or in reports that no one would ever read. I still have them, locked away, wrapped in wax paper, labeled in a code only I remember. The ones that worked, the masterpieces, the capsules that dissolved without trace, the liquids that passed as water, the drops that stopped hearts before the second blink. No one ever punished me. No one thanked me either. That was the agreement. I served, I succeeded. Then I disappeared. Sometimes, late at night, I see their faces again, not out of guilt, not remorse. I watch them like a craftsman reviewing old work, measuring the timing, the reactions, the silence, recalibrating in my mind. Perfection isn't an event. It's a pursuit. A hunger that sharpens in isolation. And if you're listening to this, if this recording finds its way into your ears, into your thoughts, just know, if I did it again, I would improve the taste.